Somebody play it, we shall. Oh, someday, well deep in my heart, I still believe that we shall. Oh, someday we shall sing. Ring out that we shall. Oh, someday. Yeah. I still believe that we shall.
Chicago, we are live all across the world. We are excited that you tuned in with us. Listen, do me a favor. Text somebody, tweet somebody. Let them know that Rainbow Push is on as we push for freedom, push for one another. Let me hear you scream, push. Grateful again for all of you who have tuned in with us wherever you are across the world. We are grateful for you. We are grateful for those of you that are watching us in our satellite cities there in Washington, D.C., New York. We're grateful for the work that we are doing in California. And listen, do not hesitate. Give us a call. The number is right there on your screen. Those of you that are listening to us live on WVON 773-256-2775 is the number. We would love for you to just check in with us wherever you are across the world. We are grateful that you're with us, and we are happy, we're excited that Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson is with us. Come on, let's celebrate our leader. He is with us today. It's a great day here at Push. It's not too late for you to join us, but it's Law Day today. There's going to be a great panel, a great discussion today. Those of you that are tuned in with us on Facebook Live, we encourage you right now to just show us a whole lot of love. So just fill that screen with some hearts and share our video. We're grateful for those who are watching us on Impact, and we're grateful for those who are on CAN TV and WVON. We lift this broadcast up. There's some names that we want you to just lift in your prayer. We are covering Miss Cheryl Grace of Nielsen and the passing of her mother. We are praying for Mrs. Daisy Camps. We just want Daisy to come back. We're praying for her wellness. And today, you all, is Cinco de Mayo Day. So happy Cinco de Mayo all across the country. But we also want to celebrate our very own Judge Greg Mathis, who has won a Daytime Emmy. Come on, you all. He's the chairman of Push Excel. And so we are grateful for his work, but we are proud of his accomplishments. And today, you all, after our broadcast, as you will see later on, we have a host of great attorneys that are with us today. But today, after the broadcast, we want you to join us for a book signing today with none other than the Honorable Attorney James Montgomery. He has a great book called Full Circle, Race, Law, and Politics, and also Attorney George Howard, 50 years at the bar and still sober. So it's Law Day today, you all, and we're excited about it. But before we go forward today, we have a great woman who is the executive director of Push Excel, because guess what, y'all? It is convention time. Aren't y'all excited about the fact that it's time to come together? And so we are excited that none other than Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson is going to come and share and give us some updates on our convention. Come on, put your hands together and make her feel real comfortable as she comes.
Good morning, Rainbow Push family. We have an exciting convention. Our annual conference is going to be in Chicago at the Hyatt, June 13th through the 16th. But before we get to the Hyatt, we want you to register now, because we have a major construction expo on June 13th. Why? Because Reverend Jackson has been telling you for the last several years, we must rebuild the infrastructure of our communities. You see people working every day. They're building at the airport. They're building in your neighborhood. They're refurbishing and rebuilding new schools. They are fixing streets. They are building new facilities downtown. And what we said to you over 2 or 3 years ago, and Jonathan has been constantly talking about it, we want to make sure we work. So we have a construction expo. We're convening all of the developers in the city and the major general contractors and black subcontractors and those who want to work. You need to register for the convention so you can be a part of the construction expo. We want to work this summer. We want to make money this summer. You want to be a part of this. This is a model that we are asking every city, every county in the nation. Wherever we are, we want to work where we live. That night, we have a major Reverend Clay Evans gospel concert. We have a mass choir. It will be directed by none other than Darius Brooks, but it's going to be a combination of the fellowship choir. Reverend Charles Jenkins will be here. Our God is awesome, and we'll have Miss Ludella Evans Reed and the traditional choir. We will have Reverend Eric Thomas from Greater Harvest. Part of his choir will be there. Reverend DeAndre Patterson and Santita Jackson will be co-hosting the program. It's going to be powerful. You'll hear Kim Stratton. You'll hear Audrey Dubois singing both gospel and opera. I don't know if, I just can't tell you. You don't want to miss it, but you got to register to come. Well, then Thursday morning, the 14th, we have a major business breakfast. Jonathan Jackson is encouraging every business person, small or large, everyone who's a corporate exec, join him at the business breakfast. If you try and make a deal, cut a deal, you need to be at the business breakfast. Oh, I think we're going to have FedEx. They have some great jobs. They're coming out of Memphis. I think we might have somebody from Starbucks. I don't know. You've been reading about it, but you probably want to be at that business breakfast. There are a lot of opportunities. I can't tell you everything that's going to be there. Technology companies will be there. You need to be there at the business breakfast. You need to get your ticket now. Meet Jonathan at the business breakfast. Well, ministers, I know you wonder, what's in it for us? Well, there's a major faith leaders luncheon at noon on Thursday. Why should you come? Because we're going to be talking about all of the public policy issues and how the faith community must be engaged. We have some surprise guests. We've invited some major preachers. We want each one of you major preachers in the city, in the Midwest, in the nation. Join us. This is a convening of the religious family at noon on June the 14th. Tickets are $125 each. And then we're moving on down that night. It's a lot of challenges with labor. Teachers have been striking because they need better wages. They want greater resources. We're looking at a major labor roundtable. Reverend Jackson is convening people who helped to start the Poor People's Campaign as Dr. King moved off the scene. Reverend Jackson, Ambassador Young, and this current Poor People's Campaign, Reverend William Barber will be making his way to Chicago. He's trying to arrange his schedule to join us. You don't want to miss the labor dinner that night. We hope to have a gubernatorial forum prior to the labor dinner. You got to register $50. That's all you got to do. Register $50. Register $50. Call your friends. Call your family. Register. You can register online, rainbowpush.org. We're moving on to Friday. Friday, we're moving up. Many of you have worried about your health care. You have challenges with access to physicians. You're paying when you have to go to the hospital. You're wondering about what is our health care policy. Meet us Friday morning at the health care breakfast. We've asked Congressman Davis to consider co-chairing along with the other Illinois congresspersons. I understand Congresswoman Kelly is on the health committee now. We're asking our legislators, both federal and state, to join us as we look at the public policy implications of where we are in health care. Following that, we'll have some workshops, but a major international women's luncheon this year. Mrs. Jacqueline Jackson is co-chairing the women's luncheon. She has a powerful committee and will be honoring women in honor of women who have made some historic marks in our existence. Winnie Mandela, many of you have heard about her. You read a little bit about her. Well, we want to kick off the Women's Luncheon next Saturday with a major women's committee meeting. We have a documentary showing of Winnie, so you can understand the truth about Winnie Mandela and how she fought for the end of apartheid and was instrumental in the release and election of Nelson Mandela to the office of President of South Africa. Hundreds of South Africans will be joining us at the convention. And so we will be given an award in memory of Winnie Mandela. Nelson Mandela's daughters will have been invited, and they expect to come to the convention. So you want to meet history and you want to see history changing. We also will be honoring the memory of Linda Brown, who made her transition. That's the little girl that Brown versus the Board of Education. She was the little girl whose father took her to a segregated school and had to make a difference for the rest of us today, and really her father did what Reverend Jackson tells every parent. He took his child to school, but this time he took her to a segregated school where she was instrumental, along with Attorney Thurgood Marshall, in changing the whole way we have access to public education and public facilities. It is the Brown versus the Board of Education. So when you think of Linda Brown, it's not just some little girl that went to school. It's some little girl who's going to school, changed the conditions for all of us. And then Friday night, we're going to be honoring and celebrating those young people who have excelled in scholarship. They have been doing great things for education. They are outstanding. They will be receiving some Push Excel scholarships. I can't tell you who they are. You will have to get a ticket for the scholarship banquet. We're going to look at some outstanding athletes that night. It's a sports scholarship banquet. It's a powerful convention, but don't wait, don't go. Saturday morning right here in the community hall at the headquarters, we will have some powerful people. I think Mark Moriel is coming. I know Reverend Sharpton's going to be there on Thursday night, but on Saturday we're going to have Attorney Brian Stevenson. He'll be talking about unconscious bias, but he's also going to be talking about this whole history of lynching. I don't have any more time. I got to go. It's a great convention. Register now, $50. Go online, rainbowpush.org, and register for the Rainbow Push Convention. And now, every week, we feature our young people so that you can see and hear our oratory at its best. You can see that we're investing in the next generation. I want to bring to you a young man who writes his own speeches. He does spoken word. He's a poet himself. Rayvon Savory, who's a junior at Chicago Military Academy. And after him, he will introduce our next speaker, who will then present to you the legal panel.
Hello. Again, I'm Rayvon Savory, and today I will be reciting excerpts from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s Blueprint of Life speech. Good morning, everyone. Upon greeting you today, I come bearing a question. And this question is, what is in your life's blueprint? Now, before you answer this question, I would first like to ask you to envision this image. Whenever a building is being constructed, behind it lies an architect. And this architect forms what we call a blueprint. And that blueprint serves as a guide, as a pattern, and no building can be well erected without a solid blueprint. I would like to suggest a few things that should be found in your life's blueprint. And the number one thing that should be found in your life's blueprint is an assurance of your dignity, of your worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't ever allow anyone to make you feel as though you do not count. Always remember that you count. Always be reminded of your worth. Always remember that your life holds an ultimate significance. Secondly, in your life's blueprint should be the basic principles of determination to exceed and excel in all fields of your endeavors. You will be deciding as the days, as the years unfold, of what you would like to do with your life, and all I say is set out to do it well. Set out to do it so well as if God Almighty himself had called upon you to do that job at this very moment in history. Do it so well that no one upon the living, dead, or unborn can ever come and do that job better than you. Do that job so well that when you pass, all hosts of heaven and earth have to pause and say, here lies a person who did their job very well. I urge you to stay in school. Despite your economic plight, stay in school. Despite any challenges that may come to face you, stay in school. Despite the life you are forced to live, stay in school. And I would like to thank you, Reverend Jesse L. Jackson Sr., for your I Am Somebody speech that inspired me to stay in school and live a purposeful life. Thank you.
Come on, put your hands together one more time. Come on, this is a great man, young man. Listen, those of you that are watching, give us a call, 773-256-2775. Share us right now on Facebook. But we're grateful that a living leader is still here with us. He's our voice, he's our champion. He is the leader, the founder of Rainbow Push. Come on, put your hands together for Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson.
I may be empty but not void, 'cause I am somebody. Oh, I am. Look at your neighbor and say, I am. Yeah, you can turn and walk away. We at the end of this day say, I am somebody. Oh, I am. Yes, I am. Hey, you can turn and walk away, but at the end of this day, say, I am somebody.
I am somebody. I am somebody. I am somebody. Respect me, protect me, never neglect me. I am somebody. My mind is a pearl. I can learn anything in the world if my mind can conceive it and my heart can believe it. I know I can achieve it. I am God's child. Down with dope, up with hope. Down with dope, up with hope, up with hope. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Come on, Mahan.
Trying to walk away, but at the end of this day, sing, I am something. Oh, I am. Look at your neighbor and say, I am. Yeah. Say what you wanna any day, but I am somebody. Oh, I am, yeah. So that God made me somebody, yeah. At the end of this day, you can turn and walk away, but I am somebody.
Let me express my thanks, Brother. Let's give Brother Mahan a big hand, shall we? Attorney Jeanette Wilson, give Jeanette a big hand. Give it for Jeanette Wilson. Today there's a certain special emphasis. This is Law Day. We tend to focus our civil rights movement on Dr. King and that of Rosa Parks, but there's something happened a year before that that laid the groundwork for their victory. If Rosa Parks and Dr. King had won the boycott, we would not won the lawsuit, we'd still be in the back of the bus. The fact of the matter, it really is about Linda Brown and Thurgood Marshall, and then Dr. King and Rosa Parks. Asked Mrs. Parks on one occasion, why didn't you go to the back of the bus? People have been lynched for doing what you did. Could have been thrown, could have been hurt that day. What happened? She said, well, I thought about going to the back because I knew it was dangerous. I thought about them until I couldn't go back. 5,000 blacks were lynched between 1880 and 1950, 5,000. They drove us. We were majority population in Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana and South Carolina. They drove us north, not as migrants, but we came north as refugees in desperation. Deep within our psyche is the impact of lynching, not just quote-unquote murder, but lynching. A woman was teaching school in 1933, had a little one-room schoolhouse, and coming home from her school, some white kids began to throw rocks at her. She stopped and said, "You should not throw rocks at adults." Went home and told their mother the black woman chastised them. They lynched her that night. What a chill to that community. The minister the next day said, "You shouldn't be lynching people." They lynched him that night. We pick up on Emmett Till near the end of the lynching season. But lynching was a form of terror that drove us and affected our psyche to this day as they enforced white supremacy. In slavery, we were seen as a threat. In slavery, we were an asset. Once we were free, we were a threat. So in slavery, we were considered an asset. Once free, a threat. There were 8 black congressmen in South Carolina alone, given the population breakdown at that time. They drove us out the South. And you look at not one black woman was raped technically till the 1950s. Look at our skin complexions. Not one rape in slavery. It was not odd for an African-American man to have a wife with 2 dark-skinned children, 2 light-skinned children. He knew who the father was. He didn't have the right to protest. You look at the pictures of people coming up the slave ships in Africa, all of them are black people with a certain texture of hair. Look at us today. We're victims of rape and rapists. Our culture has been determined by the limits put upon us by that system. We're living it out. We were enslaved longer than we have been free. We're enslaved longer than we have been free. Enslaved for 246 years, and then came the Emancipation Proclamation, and then came the 13th Amendment with a hole in it. It said all are free except those who are in prison. Opened the door for the prison industrial complex, which you see today, based on the 13th Amendment, if you will, the so-called Freedom Amendment. Then in 1896, they passed a law that made apartheid legal in this country. In 54, it was Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley with a little 9-year-old girl, Linda Brown, went to school in Topeka, Kansas. They won that law case. Say Thurgood Marshall and Linda Brown are the legal background and backbone of our struggle today. I asked Ms. Parks, "Why didn't you go to the back?" She said, "Well, I was going to the back, but I thought about the law case we were trying with Fred Gray." And in 56, they won the lawsuit. It was not just they won the boycott, they won the lawsuit. So we live in our faith, we live under the law. We strive not for faith, but for equal protection under the law. Put the lawyers' hands together for our lawyers today. I want to bring a very special guest today. Brother James Montgomery just written a book, A Full Circle in Civil Rights. Brother Jim Montgomery, make your way up here. Help Brother Jim Montgomery. A big hand for Jim Montgomery. Our counsel on the big hand for Brother George Howard, just wrote a book, 50 Years at the Bar and Still Sober. Let me see that book, George. You just wrote a book, 50 Years at the Bar and Still Sober. I don't know what that means, but I think I do. Sister Beloved, who has done more than anybody to fight for police justice in our city, Sister Lori Lightfoot. Lori Lightfoot. Amy Gundy, Director of Voting Rights and Civic Empowerment at Chicago Lawyers Committee. Amy Gundy. Christopher Bergen, so much work in immigration. And Jonathan Jackson, a lawyer provocateur. Give it up for Jonathan Jackson. Put your hands together. What made slavery such a horrid system? Slavery was legal. Immigrants came looking for a better way of life. Indentured servants came looking to work their way into freedom. Refugees came in desperation. The group came here, sold and bought on the west coast of Africa, east coast of the U.S. called African Americans. 246 years in slavery, 100 years under legal Jim Crow, and 5,000 lynchings, and here we are today. You'll hear much more about that at our convention. We're going to have a press conference today because today federal lynching is not a federal crime yet. They sought for many years to make lynching a federal crime. It is not. So we have today somebody from Emmett Till's family. There are 57 lynchings that took place in Illinois. This is in the old days of lynching. But if it was wrong, if it was lynching to take Emmett Till out of his house and shoot him and beat him and put him in the bomber, it was also a lynching to go in while Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were sleeping and shoot them in their sleep. That was lynch. So we must define lynching. We're in a group of people decide to organize and plan to kill somebody driven by race, ideology, or religion. We must make lynching a federal crime. It's not local, it's not merely state. Lynching must become a federal crime. Can I get a witness here? I really kind of want to start today with a group of us, Jim Montgomery. So lynching is a federal crime. What did that mean in the day, Jim? Lynching a federal crime? Why is that important?
Obviously, there has been lynchings that were where they hung people from trees for many generations of our people. And today, those lynchings have taken another form and another format. Those lynchings have taken the form of incarceration of our men and women for many, many years, taking them away from their families and taking them away from their homes and putting them into locations where they can work for free. So lynchings are still going on one way or the other. Police lynchings, whether it's by gunshot or otherwise, there is still taking the lives of black people and the spirits of black people through that racism and that white supremacy that pervades our everyday lives.
Brother George Howard, would you consider when Eric Garner was choked to death by police, others looked on and laughed in New York, a lynching?
Huh?
George Howard, Eric Garner in New York.
Yes. You said air gun? It is a lynching. Whenever you take advantage by weapon or otherwise of another human being because of your superior strength, it falls in the same definition and line as lynching. And lynching can come about as a result of pure thought. In the around 1970, I think it was, that I went down to Fort Myers, Florida to defend Delbert Tibbs. And Tibbs was the theological student from the University of Chicago who was traveling around the country writing a book about how people would treat another individual if they thought they were down on their luck. So to make a long story short, Tibbs got arrested for murder and for rape. And I went down to Fort Myers to represent him, and in that trial, Tibbs was charged with raping a white woman and killing her boyfriend. After the trial was over, there were some alternate jurors who was brought back in the back to get their certificates from the judge, and I spoke to one of the alternates. And I said, now that you don't have to make the decision, what would your verdict have been? And without hesitation, the man said to me, looking me straight in the eye, I would have found him guilty. And I said, you mean to tell me that if you were in the same place as Mr. Tibbs and the government had produced the same evidence against Mr. Tibbs against you that they presented against Mr. Tibbs, would you have felt that they would have been justified in finding you guilty? The man looked me straight in the eye and said, he's not me. And so it comes in a lot of ways, and it tells us that every single one of us have a job to do to get that kind of conduct, whether it be physical or mentally or whatever, out of the American system. And that's why it is being advocated and has been advocated for years that lynching ought to be a federal crime so that you can take it out of the hands of just the local people and put it in the hands of people who have a broader perspective of the value of life.
Lord Lightfoot, let me ask you a question. You do a lot of work with police. Is it if 6 or 8 police decide they're going to kill someone, can that be considered a lynching?
Of course.
Bobby Rush is sitting here. Bobby Rush was scheduled to be lynched December 4th, 1969. Bobby Rush, Fred Hampton, Mark Clark, they thought that they'd catch him asleep. He was out that night, and Bobby is sitting here today as a congressman, but Fred Hampton and Mark Clark were killed in their sleep by the police. When Emmett Till was taken out of the house and killed, called lynching, why wouldn't they call the attempt to kill Bobby Rush and to kill Fred Hampton lynching?
What we have to worry about in our current environment is people deciding to take matters into their own hands. And unfortunately, we're seeing that every single day with every single tweet. Undermining the rule of law, no respect for justice. We all ought to have a fear about that because we know what that looks like in our community. When people are lawless, when they fear nothing, when they undercut the laws and the justice that is meant to protect every single citizen, to make justice a reality for us, we ought to be afraid. But we shouldn't just stand idly by with that fear. We need to speak up. We need to demand the rule of law, demand that everybody be subject to the laws of this country and not just the chosen few, not just the few who have no capacity to speak up for themselves. But when you see what's going on in Washington and the kind of things that are done on a daily basis to undermine the Department of Justice, the FBI, and other pillars of our democracy, we ought to be concerned and speak out and talk to our members of Congress and make sure that they're not sitting idly by. Our democracy is under assault, and it's no different than what it was back in the day. It's happening now, right before us.
Jonathan, when you were in a police car, when you were arrested and put in the back of a police car and handcuffed, what happened to you? Was that to you the spirit of lynching?
That is the spirit of lynching, and I was simply detained, not arrested. Didn't do anything wrong, but you don't have to do something wrong in order to be arrested. Having said that, that's the spirit of lynching, and to the point that Mr. Montgomery had said, I think it's a broader definition that we have to be very much conscious of. We've seen lynching in the last 2 weeks. 2 persons in Oklahoma a young man in Atlanta, April 27th, and the media is quick to say it was a suicide. But you tell me on 600 Martin Luther King Drive in Atlanta, a young man, African American, in his 20s, 1 week after the Nazis were marching in Georgia, this man committed suicide at the height of his life. And it doesn't make national news. So there's also the inseparable twin, not only the physical castration, but the economic castration that happens as well. That is a form of intimidation to make sure that business persons do not have the right of free passage to be able to conduct commerce anywhere they want. You paralyze people on one side of town, you strike fear in them, and I'm telling you, I wasn't made more clear than after we left Montgomery that this is one of the collateral pieces of damages that we have to deal with. The fear we have because of the economic reprisal is the inseparable and other side of the same coin.
Attorney Bergen, in terms of the two sets of rules, a young man at the Waffle House a month ago, 2 weeks ago, killed 4 people early in the morning. They found him and took him alive. A young man in Toronto, Canada, drove into and killed 17 people. It took him alive. If that had been black or Latino, would that have happened?
Well, so obviously, I mean, it's incredible how there's these white people walking around with semi-automatic weapons, and they never seem to be shot by the police. They seem to be allowed to surrender. Even Dylan Roof goes into a church and kills 8 people, and on the way to the station, they buy him a sandwich. So clearly there's this, so Dylan Roof, who killed the people in Charleston, the African-American church, he was, not shot and killed in his capture, and he was brought on the way to the station to get a sandwich and some food for the young man. So obviously there's a double standard. And I just wanted to bring up one thing about the lynching. If the federal government can perpetrate a lynching, then it should be a federal crime as well. And in the case of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, we know that Special Agent Marlon Johnson and various informants were heavily involved and actually perpetrated the lynching of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark. So the federal government not only should make it a crime, but they should do that because of their own history of complicity in these lynchings.
Last week, Amy, I talked with Nancy Pelosi and talked with Chuck Schumer. Sent a letter to the White House, Speaker of the House, and the Senate. And they were amazed that there was no anti-lynching legislation on the docket. I talked with the Washington Post and New York Times. There was no lynching on the docket. We intend today, Congressman Bobby Rush, Congressman Dan Davis said that we're going to file to make lynching a federal crime, put on the docket this week, this session. Thank you, Bobby. I mean, in your work in voting rights, what role is race now playing in voter expulsion and voter intimidation?
What role does
race play in your work in the voting access?
One of the initiatives that we were very proud to partner with Rainbow Push on during this last round of primary elections here in Illinois was improving voter access for our community members in the criminal justice system. As one of my colleagues put it, it's not only, and as other panelists have said here today, it's not only the physical violence that continues to threaten our communities, especially the African American community, but the other ways that people are suppressed are very important to dismantle as well. When people are hearing in a polling place that poll workers who are defending slavery and making other racist remarks to try to intimidate voters, that's another way to suppress people, even beyond the physical realm. With Rainbow Push, we went into Cook County Jail. We helped protect the voting rights of people who are in pretrial detention, mainly because of a financial inability to pay bail. And these are people who are fully legally entitled to vote, but in a practical sense, if you're in Cook County Jail, how would you exercise that right? So we were proud to work with Rainbow Push to bring voting rights to the jail and that has to happen all over the state and all over the country as well. Another initiative that we had with Rainbow Push is to let people know when you are done with a sentence, when you're done with a conviction, if you have a past conviction, in many places, including in Illinois, you have the right to vote again. And that's something that a lot of our community members have an interest in, but don't necessarily know how to go through the bureaucratic hoops to exercise that right to vote. So we went door to door, we reached a lot of community members to let them know that in Illinois, we can vote even if we have a past criminal record. And we just have to keep doing that, because in some places, our laws make it seem like we're equal, our laws make it seem like things are fair now, but if our communities are not aware of the law, if we're not treated fairly by government personnel who are the gatekeepers at the polls or at the registration offices, then we can't truly direct our own destiny.
There are 4 million high school seniors eligible to register and vote this May and June. We urge you, every principal, to convene your high school seniors, bring in the registrar, and register them as they prepare for their prom activity. Register them. There are more 17 and 18-year-olds than there are 71 and 81-year-olds. They have the power to change the course of the country. Also, you have the right to take a partner to the poll. If you must go to the vote and you are intimidated by being behind the curtain by your, say everybody who votes has a right to take a partner to the poll. Everybody who votes has a right to take a partner to the poll. Attorney George Howard, you wrote a book, 50 Years at the Bar and Still Sober. What is it, 50 years and still sober? What's your point?
It gives one an opportunity to reflect upon life, and the very title suggests that I've been doing a lot of drinking for 50 years and was still able to move around. But if you notice the cover of the book, it has a martini glass on one side and the scale of justice on the other. My book has absolutely nothing to do with the martini glass. So it catches the eye. And whether your life of using the martini glass, whether you have been at the bar of justice, if you can do it for 50 years and still sober, you've done pretty well. So I invite you to read the book and understand it is about the scale of justice. I want to say this, Reverend, that we talk about this lynch thing. Some of you do not know that in 1964, when I defended Abraham Bolden, the first black Secret Service agent and what have you, after the jury had deliberated for 2 days without having reached a verdict, Judge Joseph Sam Perry, the presiding judge, called the jury into the courtroom and said to this jury that had not reached a verdict that he was going to use a prerogative of his and come in on the evidence. And he said to the jury, "You need not follow my opinion, but it is the opinion of the court that the defendant is guilty of all counts in the indictment." This is while the jury was deliberating. And I fell back in my seat, and when I gained my composure, I immediately moved for a mistrial, which was denied. That jury hung up. Second trial, he was convicted, and after the second trial, Joseph Spagnoli, the target, the head man of a counterfeiting ring, said that he had lied against Agent Bolden when he testified against him. And he said, I lied at the insistence of the government's attorney, Mr. Sykes. And so Mr. Sykes wrote out my testimony, and Spagnuolo had it in his trial and showed it. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed Bolden's conviction, and the United States Supreme Court refused to grant certiorari. That was lynching. And that type of conduct runs throughout the thread of my book in trying cases around this country. It's more than putting a rope around your neck. And these examples I set forth in the book
George, was that when Emmett Till was lynched, the jury convened and they determined that they could not find the killer. The killer was almost bragging, but he did it. Why didn't you convict him? Say, well, we can't imagine a nigger being the basis of a white man going to jail. So 40 years, there was no conviction. It's the same thing with Medgar. How do you connect today's jury trials and these police who shoot people being found innocent, Laurie?
Well, look, a lot of these shootings happen in the context of officers using their weapon on duty. As a society, as we said, police officers can use deadly force. And what ends up happening, I think about the case in Minnesota, probably one of the strongest cases where the officer clearly was wrong in the use of force. Philando Castile did everything that we tell people to do. He had a license to carry a concealed weapon. He had his hands on the wheel. He told the officer that he had a gun, that he was going to bring it out. All kinds of evidence demonstrating that the officer's actions in that case were not reasonable, that they violated the general order that he was duty-bound to uphold, and yet we had a jury who found the officer not guilty. Case after case all across the country. We have a case here that's pending, that's supposedly going this summer, and yet we have a judge refuses to allow the media in, clears the courtroom. When we see that these cases the evidence adds up, or the judge acts in a way that is different than when one of us would be standing before the bar, we should all be concerned and have pause. But what we need to do before the shooting happens is make sure that we have a well-trained police department, because, and I know there's a lot of anger out there about why should we spend one penny on the police officers when they're not investing in our community. Here's the reason why, folks. Our kids in crime-plagued neighborhoods need safety. They need to be able to grow up in an environment that allows them to thrive. If we have a police department that is engaging in unconstitutional practices, that is not well trained, that doesn't deal with bias, both obvious and implicit, that has a ripple effect on the quality of life in every community in this city and across the country. So before we get to the point where the officer pulls the trigger and we start thinking about, well, what will happen in that trial, we need to demand that our police forces engage in constitutional policing, and we need to take back control, which is why I support civilian oversight of the police.
Jim Montgomery, you just finished a book, Full Circle, Race, you start with race, law, and justice. What we want to buy this, what's in this book worth buying, Jim, besides your name on the front?
Full Circle is a demonstration of 61 years in the business of trying to be a lawyer in America. My first objective as a young lawyer was to become a social engineer like Thurgood Marshall and all those other good guys who used the law and the courts to try and change the behavior of people who mistreated people because of what they looked like. And of course, I went in with all 4 feet, fighting the segregation of the schools in Chicago, getting the consent decree ordering the desegregation of Chicago's schools. Now, that was in 1961, 62, 2018, full circle. Black schools are more segregated today than they were then. So, Reverend, that's what's one of the examples of full circle. But in addition to that, you know, like George and I fought in the bowels of the courtroom for many years for individuals who were poor, individuals who were black, individuals who were unpopular. And we learned that there was a double standard in terms of access to justice by black people and poor people. And all of those battles that we fought are basically meaningless because it's still going on. It hasn't changed in a way in connection with this current president of the United States and the people that he appeals to, the haters. They're trying to make the situation worse today than it was in earlier times. So that's basically the message of the title to the book, Full Circle.
Christopher Bergen, last few weeks, they've sent 60,000 Haitians back to Haiti. They're sending Hondurans back to Honduras. They're building a wall between us and Mexico. And now you look at it on the asylum, people in desperation hanging on the gates. What role is race playing in our present immigration policy? Role that race is playing in present immigration policy?
Well, with the person in the White House and in the Department of Justice, it's become, I guess I'd say, like a cruel policy, a policy that has no sense of justice, no Christianity in any way to it. I mean, think about what the Bible talks about, you know, welcoming the stranger and people, a stranger in a strange land. And what Jesus was all about was, you know, helping those that are lesser, that are down on their luck, that are foreigners to a place, and for this country, which I think to a large extent our policies, our economic policies, our international policies have led to many of these people coming to the United States. It's somewhat of a forced migration, just as you said, the South, African Americans coming north were refugees, or it was a forced migration. Because, for example, if you look at Central America, Honduras, El Salvador, much of the violence and the gang activity and the gangs that the Attorney General speaks about all the time and the President plays up to fearmonger, many of those gangs are as a result of our policies of deporting people back from Los Angeles and other cities where they learn the gang behavior under this system in the United States. They went back and created these networks of gangs, and then were able to create drug cartels down there to feed the insatiable appetite for drugs from Americans. So many of the people that I see that come to my office from Central America, they're fleeing this violence. Their children are being forcibly recruited into these gangs, and many of these gang members used to be in the United States. They learned their trade under American rule, went back, and now they're the kings of the country. And all these people are now, in a way, a forced migration into the United States. And it's cruel for us to say, well, now we're not going to let you in, go back and be killed.
Amy, what it means in the day when the Attorney General Session says that the Voting Rights Act of '65 was an imposition upon voting. What is that? Is that a chill on the work you're doing?
You know, I think back to a phrase you said earlier, Reverend Jackson, that sums up everything I'm doing and everything relating to protecting voting rights in the modern day, which is, it goes back to once free, a threat. And that's absolutely true for freed slaves and descendants, immigrant citizens, other populations that continue to be suppressed at the polls. And it's no accident at all that our communities of color have less voter participation in many parts of the country, have less access to the polls. That's even true in Illinois, certainly true in other parts of the country too. It was originally for racist reasons, to exclude us from having a say in who represents us and what our policies are. Nowadays, it may not be in some parts of the country because of overt racism, or people may not admit that, but if we don't completely dismantle our prejudiced and racist registration systems, the voter purges that happen all over the place, taking legitimate eligible voters off the rolls. If we don't undo that, it might seem innocuous, it might seem bureaucratic and boring, but we gotta undo that if we have any chance of having fairness at the polls.
4 million blacks in America in the South unregistered today. 2.5 million registered who did not vote the last time. We intend to cut in those numbers. Jonathan, I want you to ask the last. John, you were at the Montgomery Museum on lynching and slavery. There's now again a debate about just how relevant is the issue of slavery and lynching. Is that a relevant conversation today?
Absolutely. When you think of what President Trump is doing, he's a caricature in some ways and is very bombastic. But if you look at what he's signing, it's with a straight arrow. And that's the same thing is happening where they're dismissing civil rights cases at the Department of Education, saying they're cumbersome. They're getting rid of them, what they're doing in the Department of Commerce, on lending, what they're doing in voting. It's consistent on immigration issues and on voting issues. You're not relevant as a citizen if you cannot vote. You're not a citizen if you can't vote. We've seen the attack on some high-profile athletes, African-American, entertainers that are African-American, and we've also seen their white colleagues, counterparts, be accused of the same thing, but they've never been brought to court. Why? Because they're not going to take a white man's citizenship. They're not going to give him a felony conviction and take their citizenship. That is how serious voting is, and if you don't use it, I promise you, you will lose it. And we act like voting is a right. In fact, it's a privilege that we have to fight for. And you cannot have the privileges of business if you do not have any power.
I want to close on this note. Sergeant Laurie Gordon, why must we focus today on the state of the law? Briefly, each of you, why must we focus today on the state of the law?
Well, we need to focus because the law is a tool and a shield for us in these difficult times. We see this, for example, when Trump tried to impose the Muslim ban. What happened? Lawyers rushed to those airports to provide services, to be the advocates, to take those cases into court. The firewall for everything that Jonathan just talked about, everything that we have fought hard for that is being dismantled with a very clear eye. The lawyers have to be there with the resources to take him to court, to fight against the injustice, and it's critically important that we advocate and our voices be heard.
Bergen?
Well, I think I think that's a great point. The issue is, and it's something I've seen in other countries, like in Pakistan, there was a real push to take over power, a dictatorial push, as we're kind of seeing in this country. And the first group that the person that was trying to do this, take power, the first group they went after were the attorneys and the justices on the various courts. So I do think attorneys, we have to steel ourselves. I know as an immigration lawyer, it's harder now. We have to be tougher. We have to fight as harder than we ever have, but that's our role, you know? If we're not doing it, it's easier for fascist kind of power to take hold in this country.
Brother Howard, are you still sober?
Yes, still so. And I want to say this, that in spite of what's going on in our country today, I still have a great deal of faith in the people. And anybody who know anything about my career is that both on the state and federal level, I always put my trust in the jury. They knew when I came there was going to be a jury trial. And it got so bad until a federal judge told me one time, F. Lee Bailey and Sam Adams and I and somebody were trying a case here in the Northern District, and the judge ordered me not to look at the jury when I questioned the witnesses. And when I defied him, he made me stand at the podium and not go over to the rail, and then when I defied him further, he made me stand at the council table and question witnesses. I knew that in a bench trial what he would have done, but I convinced the other lawyers that we ought to try this case with a jury because I still have a great deal of faith in the people. And so what we have to do as lawyers to use our talent and our skills to bring our case to the people. This country has survived because of the people, and we will not ever let a dictator take it away from us.
Jim Montgomery.
Yes, sir. You know, the bottom line is that the law is a burden on change. The law is an impediment to change. And some of us become impatient with the pace of change in terms of the law. Some of us look at the political aspects of our lives as also being a little bit skewed, because even as we elect mayors, governors, presidents of the United States, as we elect legislators in the federal and the state level, aldermen on the local level, we still don't seem to be able to get that kind of vigorous representation that we deserve and expect. And I think a part of what we have to look at as a people is that because the vast majority of our people are poor, it's poverty. Poverty is not something that we choose. We're not a lazy people. Hell, if we had an opportunity to work, we would work. Poverty disables us from supporting those politicians that we elect. And therefore, somebody else supports them, and they do the will of those other people who support them. So all of where we come from is because of our impoverishment. We're in a capitalistic society. And until we can get a fair share of that capital, all of these systems of justice and law are not going to be available to us on an equal basis.
The big issue started about the Russians hacking our voting apparatus in 2016. Is our voting rights any more secure this time than last time?
It is secure, but it won't be like that unless we fight for it. And we're going to have to keep fighting for improvements and fairness, whether it's in election security, whether it's in access to the polls. Good laws and civil rights laws are a good start, but they're not enough in this day and age unless we all come together and demand implementation and enforcement of the laws. It will fall through the cracks. There will be too many excuses about delays and lack of funding, and we won't really see the kind of robust, strong, safe voting system we need unless we insist on it. And may I say as well, I think this is a time when we won't be able to see the progress we need unless we work together across communities of color. There are too many forces who are trying to divide us. who are trying to conquer us. And if we want to see these improvements in our voting system or in our representation, it's really important that we get a chance to work together.
Jonathan, before I bring on the Trinity University International Choir, I've been leaning on you all the morning about the museum in Montgomery. Why must people go and visit the museum in Montgomery as they connect slavery, lynching, and where we are today?
Well, I think what you'll see in Montgomery is that not only where it's located, and it had to be placed in Montgomery, you have to go root out some things that are wrong and not necessarily tear down all the other monuments that show the racism and the putrid part of our history, but we have to erect the new monuments that talk about the bravery and the challenges and how people have overcome. So after you see slavery and you see the heart of the Confederacy in Montgomery and you see Jefferson Davis's White House down the block from Dexter Avenue Baptist Church where Reverend Martin Luther King started his public ministry, and you see the 40-foot statue of Jefferson Davis still on the grounds of the Montgomery State Capitol. And if you walk around a little bit to the left, you'll see—
Who is Jefferson Davis?
Jefferson Davis is the biggest traitor the American people have ever seen in the history of our nation. Jefferson Davis was the president of the Confederate States of America. The United States, Abraham Lincoln led, went against the Confederate States of America, where they had their own currency, they had their own economic blueprint to go and develop all the agrarian societies going through Mexico, the Caribbean, and through Central America. It was a plan, in fact. Jefferson Davis was the leader of that. And if you get a chance, read the speech by Alexander Stephens. It's called the Cornerstone Speech. That was his vice president. He said, let's make it clear, this issue about succession is about slavery and race. And he says, blacks are at the bottom. Surely as God has put the stars in the skies and his providence over the universe, and he's made marble, he put the black people at the lowest part of the universe. That was his philosophy. And even the people that spew that racism, that pick up a Confederate flag, don't even necessarily understand it, but it's in the blood. This is why we have to go and root it all the way out in order to have a chiropractor, to have a surgeon, to go on and fix it once and for all. This is why it's metastasizing and keeps coming back up, because it's not honest. Now, the last thing I want to tell you about the Montgomery Museum and lynching, I've studied business 30 years plus, but I didn't really put together the work of Mrs. Ida B. Wells, whose name has been taken down off 39th Street, that we have to put back up there, because she came up here on an anti-lynching crusade. The work of Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, the Niagara Movement, then on to the National Association for Colored People. Anti-lynching was the crusade. To erase that history, then you don't really understand why blacks aren't in business in the numbers that we should be, because there's economic reprisal. What do I mean by that in closing? If you and I try to do business in the city of Chicago today, there are 9 agencies that have to certify I'm black. So while whites are going on and doing business—
Wait, say it again. Say it again.
Okay, Dad, I want to be very clear. On my birth certificate, it says, I think I'm colored on my birth certificate because I'm born in 1966. And if I show my mother and my grandmother's birth certificate, I still have to go through the Department of Aviation to be certified as a Negro. I've got to go through CTA to be certified as a Negro. I've got to go through the City Hall to be certified as a Negro. I get a special certificate, another manumission slip to even go do business as a vendor of color with the Chicago Public Schools. It's just racism. Then they give you consultants to go to help you with your paperwork, and if something is filled out incorrectly, they can put you on a penalty box for 1 year before you can reapply to show that you're colored. So when you wonder why there aren't that many African Americans, and then I don't want to talk about now our elected officials that haven't joined the fight to create opportunities to bring back to our community. All of this work is not happening in our community without a complicit level of betrayal by our elected officials that you don't know their names, that won't raise their voice and won't fight for the economics to come back in our community. Now, you should go see the Montgomery Museum, and you will see that some blacks got lynched for asking for their receipt because they were trying to overturn a sharecropping system where they were always negative at the end of the year. Some blacks were lynched when they created businesses that were prosperous, that created competition. They were anything that was an insult and anything that had to deal with the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, you were taken out. And that's why, Dad, I want to say in closing, I applaud you. You talk about 50 years sober, 50 plus years on the battlefield fighting for economic inclusion, fighting against racism. I applaud you, not just father to son, man to man, and I'll always keep looking up to you.
Well, I'm still sober. Come on, choir. Let's see if I guess choir. give our guests another big hand. I want to do two things before they bring in the next selection. Number one, Reverend Mississippi, make your way up here, sir. We are going to have an 11:30 press conference today with Congressman Rush and Davis and members of the Teal family, another family here whose grandfather was lynched. Will you stand? Are they here yet? About lynching in your family. Come on down. Give Sister Crawford a big hand. Member of Lynch family. Jim, there was 57 lynchings in Illinois. 354 lynchings in Mississippi alone. 167 lynchings in South Carolina. We are going to get to the root of the lynching syndrome, because it affects how we think and feel and see. Bob Rush was an object of lynching. They meant to lynch you, and and by calling it murder or police or brutality, we lessen the load of it. See, lynching is a federal crime. It has not yet been made a federal crime. We intend, Congressman Rush and Davis and our delegation, this coming Wednesday, we're going to Washington to seek to put a bill in the hopper to make lynching a federal crime again. Secondly, our convention, June 13th through 16th, is $50 to register. I want all of you to register for the convention today. Registration is low. The meal events vary. The business breakfast, $1,500 for a table of 10 and the like. But I want you to register and get all the information about the convention. If you are not registered, you want to register for the convention, please stand. You want to register for the convention, you want to register. You want to register for the convention, please stand. You want to register for the convention, please stand. You want to register, Brother Anderson, thank you for standing. You register for the convention, stand wherever you are. Meantime, in today's collection, you'll give at least $100, please stand. Today's collection. Jim, you don't have to stand. You can sit down, Jim, and just give yours. You don't have to stand. You can just give it straight out. You don't have to stand. Just give it. You'll give at least $100 for today's collection. Please stand. At least $100, please. Why y'all get ready to sing something now? International? Y'all get ready to sing something. You'll give at least $100 for the. Please stand for the registration. At least $100. Please stand. At least $100. We need your support. Why don't you sing about that ship, Mississippi? Mississippi, why don't you sing about that ship in a minute now? You give at least $100, please stand. You give at least $100, please stand. Please, you get up today, right now. Let's give our lawyers a big hand for Law Day. Give it up for lawyers for Law Day. 60 years and still sober. I like that. I'm going to do that. And still sober. Some people 6 months and still drunk. You'll give at least $100, please stand. At least $50 for our collection. It costs to do what we're doing. We don't have a government grant. Mississippi, see if they can work with you over there. Come on, Phil. I'll take it up, Jim. Come on, Phil. Jim.
I'm gonna take a trip on that good old gospel ship, and we'll go sailing through the air. I'm gonna take a trip. Come on, put those hands together. That good old gospel. And we'll go sailing through the. And when my ship comes in, I'm gonna leave this old world of sin. And we'll go sailing through the. Well, I'm gonna take
comes in, we're gonna leave this old world, and we'll go sailing through the, well, trouble in my way. I have to cry sometime. Yeah, so much trouble. We gotta cry sometime. Well, I lay awake at night. I lay awake at night. I lay awake at night. But that's all right. That's all right. I heard him say, Jesus, after a while, I'm gonna take a trip on that good old gospel, and we'll go sailing through the air. Yeah, when my ship comes in, we're gonna leave this old world, and we'll go sailing through the trouble in my way. I have to cry sometime. Yeah, so much trouble. I have to cry sometime. Well, I lay awake at night. 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 But that's all right. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, that's all right. I want to say, Jesus will. Can I get one witness? Let me see you wave your hand. Yeah, he will. Yeah, he will. Hey, yes, he will. You know what I tell him sometime? Reverend, you've always told us the ground ain't no place for a champion. We got to rise up, y'all. Hold on. Hold on. Hold on. How many of you gonna hold on? Hold on. Hold on. Don't give up. Don't throw in the towel. Help is on the way. After a while, yeah, while he will.
Reverend, we have some special guests today. Brother Bergen, he's a Hispanic brother, and Sister Gandhi, she's an Indian heritage. They don't understand that all that stuff you're doing, so explain to them what you're trying to do when you do all that stuff you've been doing.
It is called an expression of excitement.
Hit that ship one more time. That ship one more time.
Come on, put your hand together. When I think of his goodness, what he done for me, I just want to praise him what he done for me. Yeah, I'm gonna take a trip on that good old, and we go sail when my ship comes in, I'm gonna leave this old world, and we go the air.
Let me say a big hand for Congressman Davis, to Congressman Danny Davis. We are going to do three things now and leave. One, I want all the lawyers who are here today to be with me in the Evans Chapel. Danny Davis and Bobby Rush are going to help lead the drive. Talked with Cedric Richmond, Danny, this week. Talked with Maxine Waters, talked with Nancy Pelosi, talked with Schumer. We're going to try to have at the meeting Wednesday, you guys have a bill on making lynching a federal crime. And it's going to be led from Chicago where the refugees came. So the refugees came to Chicago. Put your hands together for the refugees. Now, second, the others of you who want to help us we need some volunteer for the convention. You will help with the convention. Stand. Meet me in the community hall. When this is over, please you go straight to community hall. We will talk about the convention. Brother Anderson, thank you for coming, for standing. We need some convention volunteers. Stand. Convention volunteers, stand. Convention, you volunteer to help in some way in the convention. There's so much to be done. We need volunteers. You were standing, go upstairs right now, please. Go to